Hi everyone, we're gonna finish up our Christmas in July by doing our very last reindeer block. Let's bring you around. Our very last reindeer block. We have to get it appliquéd, so we're gonna do that right now. So the first thing that I like to do is the curviest spots first, because I'm using a blanket stitch, and I find the blanket stitch is actually hard to do on a curve, so I like to get those curvier pieces out of the way. I'm going to hold my tail, tuck my needle in manually, and then I just go ahead and give it a tack or two just so that that thread stays in place. All right, and then I'm just gonna get everything lined up and start stitching. I've got my blanket stitch length at 5 millimeters, which is the longest that my machine will do. So I like the way that long stitch looks, kind of gives it that vintage Christmas look, which is what I'm going for on my curves. I will shorten my length as I go just to make those curves as smooth as possible. I also have my machine set for its slowest possible speed so that I can maneuver the curves. As I get where it's a bit straighter, I can pick up speed, which is great, but appliquing this way is not the fastest process. But this is one of my favorite quilting methods. So I've come to my first super small curve. I'm going to cut my stitch length in half to 2.5 just to manage getting through this curve. Because my reindeer, he's got tiny little ears, and then I can just get that stitch nice and long again. Hi, the Dizzy Desk. Hello. We are appliquing the last of my Christmas in July blocks via appliqué. I am doing the reindeer. See if we can get you a better look. Here. There he is. I need to just move my desk next to my quilting desk next to it. I have the Baby Lock Crescendo. I was lucky enough that I actually got this machine for free. I had a family member who, this is going to sound terrible, she went blind. So she could no longer see to quilt. So I inherited this along with like 300 pounds of fabric. So it is awesome. Hello to everybody who's joining. We are appliquing a reindeer block for the last of my blocks for Christmas in July. It is my favorite quilting. My favorite way to quilt blocks is through appliqué. And this one is going to be a reindeer. And here at the end, I'll give you a preview of the table runner that I will be making for Christmas. Just going to shorten my stitch length again to maneuver a smaller curve. This reindeer's got very curvy antlers. And my favorite stitch length, of course, is the longest one at 5 millimeters. And so to maneuver these small curves, I have to drop it. But I think that 5 millimeters just gives it the more vintage Christmas look, which is what I am going for with this. So glad you guys are liking it. And if we need to switch that angle on that camera, we can move you to the back of my machine. Since we're not quilting a whole quilt, just doing one block, it makes it a lot easier to move that camera around. So it is really sad that the person I got this machine from, the reason I got it was because she went blind and she could no longer see. But she was so excited that I started quilting. Gave me tons of fabric. And then before her passing, she was able to touch 2 of the quilts that I had made using this machine. And my toddler has stolen both of those quilts as her own now. They are her favorites. We take them on road trips and she just snuggles up in the back. So we're just going to keep going around our little reindeers. Curvy antlers. That's why I always like to start with the curves. They are the hardest to maneuver with that blanket stitch, especially when you use it as long as I like it. So you just got to maneuver the curves. But once we get to his belly, it goes so much faster. So I have been quilting since I started right before my daughter was born in 23. So only for a couple years before that, I taught myself to sew on a vintage Sears Kenmore. And I started that right before 2020. And I made tons and tons of napkins. It was absolutely crazy. So many napkins. I had to start giving them away. And then I was terrified to sew anything else but basically a hem on some fat quarters. So it took me a while to get into quilting. I did watch some YouTube videos. And from there, I took a charm pack. I sewed it together. And it took me a year to do that. I didn't have a great pregnancy. So I didn't enjoy doing anything. And so after she was born and after we adjusted to my daughter's nap schedule where I no longer had to nap when she was napping, I needed something to do. And so I thought, I'll try quilting. And I never looked back. I could not stop. As soon as I finished my first quilt, I started my second quilt. While I was working on my second quilt, I started the third quilt. And that is how my process goes. I never can do just one project at a time. Napkins were my gateway drug. And you know what's funny? I haven't made a napkin since. I don't actually like to hem. So why I did napkins, I don't know. Hemming is not fun. That's why I did quilting. You don't have to hem stuff. All the raw edges get encased. I am almost done with my little reindeer's antlers, which, again, the curviest and most difficult part of the reindeer. Then I'll get into his face, and then after his face, it is smooth sailing. Oh, there is no reason to be nervous. All you have to figure out how to do is sew a straight line. Once you can sew a straight line, that's all that matters. That's why napkins were such a great start into quilting. A lot of people say make a pillowcase. Never have made a pillowcase. A tote's a little bit harder, I think, than like a quilted blanket. You know, just get the rough shape of a square. All I did, I got a charm pack, so 42 5x5 squares, laid them out into rows, and sewed them together in just a strip method. And got all those together, backed it, attempted mitered corners, which have been the bane of my existence. Mitered corners to me are so hard. And then I found a vintage quilt that my grandmother, she didn't piece it, but she quilted it. And they didn't miter the corners. It was just 4 strips of fabric, and they just folded it to cover the raw edges. And it was just like, if I had known this 3 years ago, I probably never would have bothered learning how to do a mitered corner. They all just would have had those raw, I would have tucked in the raw edges and just done strips. That would have been so much easier for me. But I did not ever think to do that because everybody miters their corners nowadays. So should have joined a quilting circle back in like the 60s which I am not old enough to have done that. And I'd have learned you didn't have to miter those corners. So I have finished the antlers and the face on our little appliqué reindeer. Again, I'm using my blanket stitch at the longest setting. It's 5 millimeters, not milliliters. It's not liquid. I actually do have it on. I am able to adjust the speed so that if I push my pedal all the way down, it doesn't go too fast. And so I actually have mine on the lowest speed. I have a tendency to be a bit of a speed demon if I have it wide open. And this guy has lots of tight little curves. So I like to go nice and slow on him. I find it relaxing to do this nice and slow, so that's not so bad. It's more when I'm like sewing strips together, I leave it wide open and then wonder why my seams aren't straight. So to me, slow and steady wins the race. Welcome to those who are just joining. I am appliquing the last of my Christmas in July blocks for my table runner and matching pot holders. I am appliquing the last of the reindeer to this particular block. Each of my blocks are 10 by 10, and I roughly centered one applique shape in the center. I used my AccuQuilt Go to cut these shapes out so that they were consistent as I went. I could have freehanded it, yes, but who doesn't love to turn a crank on a die cutter and just watch your fabric magically turn into that shape? It was probably one of my favorite Christmas presents, was getting that AccuQuilt Go to cut fabric. I still have to cut some of my larger pieces by hand, like these 10 by 10 squares I had to cut by hand. But I am a self-taught quilter, and those rulers, and we're going to pick up the speed now. Those rulers and the rotary cutters, I never quite figured out that skill very well on my own. So that AccuQuilt saved me a lot of headache as I was learning to quilt. I did cheat on this applique and I just spray basted it down. And as I picked up the speed, his little foot is popping up. So we're going to slow it back down to make sure his little foot goes down and looks nice on here. But if you're learning or you're wanting to get into quilting, I highly suggest getting some pre-cuts and just doing a patchwork style quilt. I only use those 42 squares. It is the tiniest quilt. It's about the size of a wall hanging. I think technically it gets labeled as a lap quilt, but the only lap it really covers is my toddler. But it was so easy just to learn how to keep those 1/4 inch seams as accurate as possible. Didn't worry about things like matching up my points. So when they did match up, that was a real highlight. But I did not worry about doing that. I was more worried about learning how to do an appropriate seam length and making sure that it held up real well. And it's been through a lot of washes. My toddler uses that one as a road trip blanket. So I know that it gets a lot of use and a lot of washes. My stitch jumped a little far forward. I'm just going to take it back, put a couple tacks in there, and then I'll just trim that excess thread here at the end. So if you're just joining me, I am appliquing a reindeer onto a 10 by 10 inch square. He is going to become a table runner and some pot holders. If you're able to stay with me to the end, we are going to get you guys a preview of what that table runner looks like. My sewing room is also my guest bedroom, so it is draped along the bottom of my guest bed. And almost looks like one of those runners that you'd put on a bed, so I guess it could have a dual purpose, because I have not made a Christmas quilt yet. I bought all the fabric to do it, but I have yet to sit down and actually do that. So I'm on my last curve of my reindeer's neck, and we'll be able to see what he looks like finished. Oops. Let's finish out this stitch right here and just give him a couple quick tacks to finish him off. And here we can see our little reindeer is appliquéd on there. I just think he is so cute. You can really see the stitches better on the back, and you can see that they had to be smaller stitches on those curves, even though I like the 5mm stitch, the longest that my machine does. I like that one best, but he's just so cute. This particular one is going to be a pot holder, along with his other little friend, but in the orange with the blue polka dots. And then he's also got a third pot holder of Santa's sleigh. I tested out a satin stitch on this guy. I'd never done one before, so this was a learning curve, and you can see it puckered real bad, so this one's going to be turned into a learning opportunity, and we will just make another one when I've got some time to make another one. I am going to switch back to Summerween at the start of August. Let's get you all that preview of the table runner, which is here on my bed in my guest room. So I've got the snowflake, and each one's going to have, I am terrible at this camera on this stand. Let's just freehand it. So I've got the snowflake on the end, Santa's sleigh, where I just used that blanket stitch. I did not do the satin stitch again. One of those matching brown reindeer that we just did together. Little orange guy. And then a Christmas present with a bow. I've got to cut another strip out from the ones I have made to get this table runner finished out. But I just think it's going to be so cute on my Christmas table in quite a few months. But I got all the applique done on it, so I was really excited about that. But this guy took me like 40 minutes because he's got so many curves and he's so small. So much effort. More than I thought it was going to be. So, does anybody have some last minute questions about applique or quilting? I can let you know. Coming up, I'm going to be doing Summerween, and so I'll start doing some of those Halloween type blocks. I'll probably do another table runner and pot holders. Those are some of my favorites to do. Instead of doing a full-size blanket, you get a project done really quick, which is always awesome. So, all right, guys. So I finished up quilting that last block, or attaching the applique to the quilt block so that I could finish it off. I'm going to have 2 pot holders and a matching table runner, and it'll be so cute come Christmas time. Go ahead and keep following along, and as we leave Christmas in July and get back to Summerween, you'll be able to see all those blocks as I start working on them. Thanks for joining me, guys. I will see you next time.